do okay. I read the book. Don't worry.
How are you, Anurag? Good to see you.
Good to see you, Prakash. Good evening. Let me welcome you to our daily BW dialogue. Today we're talking to someone I know well. Someone, when I grow up, I want to be like him. Someone who's a friend. I've known him for many, many years, and somebody who's a prolific writer, and he's a great storyteller. He's a great storyteller. His books are about stories. They are stories within stories. They have anecdotes, and through very simple examples and anecdotes, the story is told and the point is driven home. Today, we are going to talk to Mr. Prakash Iyer. He's a leadership coach. He's a motivational speaker, but he's the author of many books. This is his fourth book. He's done literally best-selling books in the true sense of best-selling. He was a corporate executive in his past life. Before he got into motivational speaking, into writing, into coaching, into being a full-time author, Mr. Iyer was the managing director of Kimberly-Clark. He was the CEO of the IPL team. He ran a publishing company. He worked for some of the venerable companies in India. But today we are talking to Mr. Prakash Iyer, the author. So welcome, Prakash, and congratulations on your latest book. How come no one told me that? So it's a great feeling to get your fourth book out. But before we ask you about the book, I want to ask you, how have been the last 18 months for you, both personally and professionally?
Hey, Anurag, thank you so much for all those kind words. And it's such a pleasure to be chatting with you over here today. And my favorite part of the introduction, of course, is when you said, an old friend. I love that bit. It's always nice to be referred to as a friend, even if someone like you then says that it's an old friend and people get confused whether he means someone he's known for a long time, or is this someone who's now become old? Because I love the way you say, you'd like to be someone like me when you grow up. Come on, Anurag, you're an inspiration in so many ways, but it's such a pleasure to be talking to you. Super excited, Anurag, at the launch of my new book. How have the last 18 months been for me? I think it's been like everyone else at some level to say, hey, none of us ever thought that we would go through the kind of change in our lives that we actually did. I don't think in our wildest dreams, we would have kind of done a scenario quite like what played out. And I know that in corporates, it's popular, it's fashionable to do scenario planning. And you try and look at, what you think is a worst case scenario. And then COVID happens. And I think it's unlike anything you might have thought. But guess what? I think it's not quite a worst case scenario as much as saying it's a time of change. So what's it been like for me? I think it's been, the overriding thought has been maybe 3 or 4. First, it's been a time of change and just getting used to the idea that things are changing. It's been a time of realization, I think. Don't take anything for granted. Don't assume that the world will remain the way it was. And even for someone as optimistic or positive as I might fancy myself to be, I think there's a message there that, never take anything for granted. The world can be very, very different from what you might have thought might happen. It's also been a time for learning new tricks, learning to do things differently, learning how to do some simple stuff, perhaps in a very, very different way. I think we've all become more tech savvy or digitally savvy in this period of time. Best of all, I think it's also been a time for introspection, whether it's for me speaking personally or it's for a lot of people that I might be meeting. I think it's a time when people have started asking themselves fundamental questions around, why do I do what I do? What really matters in our lives? And I think it's interesting. And, it's one of those things that maybe an act of God in a sense to say, it took a crisis like this to make many of us ask some fairly fundamental questions of ourselves. What really gets me going? What do I really want to do? And the realization perhaps that my future is not what I thought will be, after those ESOPs are vested and after I've got that house and after I've done something else, then I will figure out what I want to do. I think people are suddenly realizing the future is now and you need to do what you want to do right now. So that's really been how it's been for me, Anurag.
Thank you so much, Prakash, for outlining It's been a time for introspection. It's been a mixed bag. This has been my first question to everyone I talk to, because a lot of things that everyone like you says are similar. It's been a time for introspection. It's time for think of purpose. Time not to wait for things to happen. Now, let me ask you, in your view, what has changed in the last 18 months for good, and what has changed for not so good? And what is here to stay, and what is, in your view, temporary? Because we are forced to do it. We're doing it out of compulsion. The moment all of us are vaccinated, or possibly the corona goes away, we'll be back to our normal ways. At least that's what I think. What do you think, Prakash? What has changed irreversibly, and what is temporary?
I think I was talking to a dear friend and who's in advertising, and he was referring to a campaign for one of those early Iridium phones, those satellite phones which became so fashionable. And the campaign for that, Anurag, you might remember, the headline was "Geography is History." Just suggesting, therefore, that distance doesn't matter. You can be anywhere on the planet and you can call other people. This is no longer about long distance calls and all of that. So geography is history. And I think that is probably one of the bigger things that's happened and happened for good. I think we've suddenly figured that distance doesn't matter. I mean, you could be in Gurgaon and I could be here in Pune, and we could be talking as if we were in the same room. And I think we could stretch that now to include work, to say, hey, it doesn't have to be that your entire team has to be in the same city. You could be across locations. It has suddenly meant that I think distance becomes irrelevant. And I think in terms of the way the workplace might be, I think there's a huge impact, which is to suggest, therefore, that I don't know if we will ever go back to a norm where everybody goes to work like we did earlier and everybody has to be in office at the same time. I think that might have changed forever. And we'll all get used to the fact that, look, that's how it is. I think the fact that we can do a hell of a lot with technology, we're all discovering that. And I think, on a professional front, if you ask me, I think just discovering that I can do conversations like these, or I can do keynotes, or I can do a day-long training program, sitting here in my little home office and sitting in front of a screen, and I can still make it come alive for other people. I think it's both challenging and a great opportunity. To say that technology, I think, has changed the way we might look at things and the way we might work. The more interesting part of your question, of course, is what do I think has only changed temporarily? So here's what I think, Anurag. At one level, I feel this whole idea of wanting to meet face to face for everything, I think that will change. I mean, there was a time when people in business traveled, if only to tell other people that, look, it's so important. So it's not unusual for us to say, oh, you're in Delhi, do you have any other meeting? You say, no, I've only come to meet you. And the person feels so much more important that, wow, you've flown all the way and come here to meet me. And that became a statement of, commitment to the business. I think that's going to change. People are not going to be traveling just for the sake of traveling. People are not going to be saying, I need to meet everybody face to face. What it has done magically for many of us is that it's opened up our calendars for so much more, So gone are the days when you'd say, oh, 27th of September, I can't do it because I have a board meeting in Chennai, right? Now I can say 27th September, I can do it because board meeting is only for those 3 hours. And outside of those 3 hours, hey, I'm good to do whatever you want me to do. Here's the interesting bit though. I think people will want to meet other people. There is so much you can do on a virtual screen, but I think the pleasure of being in the same room, of being able to feel the smile on somebody else's face, to feel the anxiety on someone else's face, maybe the ability to kind of, slap somebody else's back or just kind of give someone else a hug with, of course, the mask on and with the other norms in place. I think we will want that back. I think human beings fundamentally are social animals. And I think we need that support. So I do believe that I'm not sure if revenge shopping will be back. I do think revenge travel will be back. I think revenge socializing will be back in the sense that, hey, once we are vaccinated, we are in a safer place. We will want to be in the company of other people. These could be our teams. This could be friends, family, new acquaintances. we'll want to be in flesh and blood with other people.
Okay, Prakash. Now let's dive into your book. How come no one told me that? And I read the introduction and I realized, of course, I could realize what you were saying. But once I read the introduction, I realized you talked about the fact that we go to school and, we achieve so much, but no one tells us, or in a college, that relationship is important. What do we? No one tells us that collaboration is more important than being competitive. And at every stage of life, we need to learn new life skills, life lessons. And your first chapter or section is that. But let me come to the title of the book. Why this book? Why this book now? Why this title? And most importantly, what is different in this book than your previous 3 books?
I guess, Anurag, why now is a good question to ask. And if you ask my editor at Penguin, she will tell you how, she's been hoping that there'll be a book out much faster than it has been. So it's been a bit fairly long in the works. So why now is easily answered by saying that hey, it was a good time. COVID meant that suddenly, especially if I go back to, let's say, April last year, a lot of the speaking work that I do was at a standstill. A lot of the meetings were suddenly not happening, and people are still getting used to the idea that, hey, there is something like a Zoom and there is Microsoft Teams and, and Google Meet, and you can do all of those things, but it was still beginning to happen. So I think I had a lot more time on my hands. And that meant that you tell yourself, hey, come on, let's do something with that time. Let's try and put it to good use. So one good use of the time was spending time with the family. I think we certainly spent more time with the kids and the extended family who were at home, as it happens for us at that time. We were lucky, the children were home, and we loved it. So I think we just had a great reunion of sorts. It was also a time for me to say, maybe a good time to write that book. So perhaps what got me thinking was really to say, hey, we're going through unprecedented times. No one's given us a script on how to handle a crisis like this. And then you start thinking about your own life, and you start thinking of several of those little stories from your life where you say, actually, no one tells you this at a certain level, but you pick it up somewhere. There are so many small lessons you learn in your life from other people, from friends, from colleagues. Something happens, things go wrong, and you learn a lesson. So the way I thought of it was that, as I look back on my life, I'm lucky. There are several lessons that I've probably learned. And my question to myself then was to say, hey, what can I do to share some of these lessons? And really, it's not to put it out there. It's not like I started with an idea saying, wow, I have a book and it's going to be called How Come No One Told Me That? And now let me try and put things in there. It was more around saying, what are some of those little lessons that we've learned, which we don't always get to learn? And I would say this again, I see myself as being a lucky man because I got a chance to work in some great teams, some good organizations where perhaps I was lucky I got to learn these lessons. I said, why should I just keep it to myself? Let me try and share it. And that's been something that's been very close to my heart. I'm the kind of guy, Anurag, who if I read something in the morning and I like it, I want to share it. It could be something interesting that I saw and I'll say, so at the dinner table, the family can tell what have I been reading because I'll probably be telling them something I read today. Or, I met this person, what she said, here's something interesting. So this ability to share some of those lessons that I thought made a difference to my life, that I thought will help other people to get it right for themselves. That's really what got me started on this book.
Fantastic. Tarun Agrawal is already asking you questions about your transition from being a corporate CEO to an author, but we'll come to that, Tarun, towards the end. Bharat is saying, good evening, everyone. Tarun is also saying that he loves your Chai with Pie series and he looks forward to those anecdotes. And Tarun, I can tell you there are a lot of anecdotes in the book, even the chapters within the sections are, or the stories, because really the book is full of stories, I titled beautifully. So let's dive into the book. Prakash, your book, first section is called Life's Lessons. And it has some interesting stories and the titles of the stories. Why don't you take us through the life lessons in this book called How Come No One Told Me That?
So maybe I'll start with a very simple life lesson. And this goes back to a time when my children, I have twins, two amazing young adults now, but they were about 5 years old, 4 or 5 years old when this happened. They were in school. I'd gone to pick them up. And this was in Dubai in the days when we were in Dubai at that time. So the kids get into, I've got them, they're holding my hand and we're walking from the school gate to the car where it's parked. When my daughter, Shruti says, I want to sit on the right, Dad, today. And, to me, it didn't really mean anything, but all I could think was that Shruti, being Shruti, was always worried, needed to see Dad around to feel secure. And therefore, if it's a left-hand drive and I'm sitting on the left, if she sits on the right, she can see me. So I said, sure, Toots, you can sit on the right. At which point in time, her twin brother, who's actually 4 minutes younger, he says, no, Dad, I want to sit on the right today. And, and I say, but she asked for it. He says, no, I want to sit on the right today. And so then, like how it is, you just want to kind of get them to the car and you tell your older daughter, who's this more responsible kind of person already, 4 minutes older only, and tell her, what, you can sit there next time. Let Abby sit there on the right today. And Abby is, of course, delighted that he's got his way. And Shruti is probably thinking, not again. And then we get to the car and Abhishek looks at me and says, Dad, which is the right side? And to me, it strikes me about how for all of us in our lives, we often want something without realizing why do we want it, and very often we make the mistake of wanting something because everybody else wants it. We want to go to engineering college because everyone's going to engineering college. We want a job in that IT major because everyone's joining that IT major. And I think just trying to understand for yourself, why do you want something, and not wanting things only because other people want it, I think was a pretty good lesson to take away from me. And I think in many ways impacted my decisions in life to say, what, if somebody wants something and you don't want it, just let them have it. Let them have the pleasure of having something because it may not mean anything to you. And don't just try to want things because other people want it. And like I said, there is a little bit of that, Abby, I think in a lot of us, where we are constantly worried about, missing out, and we want things because everyone else seems to want it. So that's an example of a life lesson, perhaps that came to me pretty early from here.
Okay. There's also a chapter, a boat ride to remember. Why don't you take our viewers on this boat ride? And hopefully you will remember it and the lesson associated with it.
Oh, there is a lake if you go to Kerala, which is where the story was set, you must take a ride on a boat in a lake. It's these little canoes that they have, and somebody told us that if you were close to Ashtamudi Lake in Kerala, you must take this ride. And if you read the book, you'll find, actually, I've referred to Munro Island, canoe service. That's the name of this particular guy. And there was a chap called Vimalan who met us and took us on this boat ride. And it was out of this world. So here is what happened. We went on this boat ride to see sunrise on the Ashtamudi Lake, okay, which is quite brilliant. So you go through these narrow little streams and waterways on a little boat. And Vimalan was this guy who speaks only Malayalam. And luckily for me, I could speak a bit of it. So I could have this conversation with him. And he's talking to me and telling me all about what's happening. So, we are going along and suddenly we find that the poor fellow's pushing through everything. And through that conversation, I figured that there were some life lessons that he actually imparted that morning. So what was really a fabulous boat ride to see sunrise on the Ashtamudi Lake turned into like a master class in how to live your life. And I'll, maybe share a couple of those lessons from there, which includes the fact that, I remember how, as you're going through this boat, there are these little bridges that you cross, quite Venice-like. So as you're approaching the bridge, he will say, bend, bend. And you need to really bend, duck, and hold your head to make sure you don't hit the bridge. And the minute we came out of the second or third bridge, he tells me, Prakash Sare, which is the way he referred to me, you know what? I'm a lucky man. I've taken lots of people on this boat. I've taken like film stars, I've taken cricketers, I've taken big politicians, businessmen, lots of big people have sat on my boat. But you know what? They may be big people, but when I tell them to lower their head, they better listen to me. If they don't, they'll be in trouble, you know? And which is such a powerful idea. It doesn't matter who you are, how big you are. There are some people in your life, when they tell you duck, you better duck, right? You can't be using rank and hierarchy and position all through your life. Those might have a place in an organization context, perhaps, or in some other ranking of any kind. But there are people who will tell you when they say move, you better move. When someone says get out of the way, you better get out of the way. And maybe there's another lesson that we learned that day. And I remember how the wife was with me and she was feeling bad. Poor man is pushing so hard. Three of us, sitting on that boat with him, and he's alone pushing this, rowing the canoe to try and get us there. And then we had to take a turn somewhere. And we could see that he was going to have to turn. He turned into a place where we would be going uphill, upstream, the current against us. And that's terrible. So she tried to be nice to him. And she said, why are you doing that? Why don't you turn the other way? The current will be with you. It'll be so much easier for you. And the man said, yeah, that will be easier. But you know what? Then you can't see the sunrise. It'll take us somewhere else. And he said that, so think about it, the road, the path that you take in your life can't be the path that's easier. It's got to be the one that will take you to your destination. And I think the mistake many of us make in our lives is to say, oh, let's go that way because the current is with you and it'll be easier. But we forget that our destination is on the other end. So, just a couple of examples of the kind of life lessons.
Prakash, how do you remember stories for so much before, they happened many, many years back? So would you journal them, or you just remembered when you wanted to kind of get to them? What is the secret to remembering stories from 10, 20, 30 years apart?
I guess when you become as old as I am, you'll realize that your memory is a terrible thing. So it's very, very difficult to remember. And maybe I learned this also pretty early. So yes, Anurag, as a general rule, I do 2 or 3 things. The first is that I try and write it down. So I actually have a fairly large journal or a collection of little incidents, little stories or things that might have happened. But that's only one part of it. The other thing that I do is to, like I said earlier, is to share it. So I will try and replay what happened. And that audience could be anybody from the children to the spouse, to friends, to colleagues at work, to the driver of the car I'm in. It doesn't matter. But I will tend to talk about it. And I think that's a great way to kind of figure out, how is this landing? Is there something? And sometimes people will tell you something you may not have thought about, and maybe make that lesson stand out even more for you than you might have otherwise thought was possible. So yeah, I certainly write it down, but I have found that more than writing it down, sharing it is a great way to kind of get those stories to be imprinted in your head, and for you to try and figure, does this work? Is there something that you really, sometimes you might think, wow, there's such a big lesson here, and somebody tell you, rubbish, this doesn't work. So maybe, you can get some feedback too.
Okay, now life is about evolving. Life is about getting better, which is another section in the book. And again, you talk of the alteration tailor, right? And I was thinking before reading the chapter that, oh, I have understood what it is. And it was exactly like that. So I understood it because it's very, if you've gone through it, you can understand where you're headed to. But why don't you tell our readers and viewers, how does one get better? And especially the story about the alteration tailor.
So the alteration tailor was actually born out of something I read somewhere about how, it was like a stylist giving 5 style tips for people or something like that. And you know how typically those tips will be things like get your colors right, make sure your socks match your trouser, or what color tie to wear with your jacket, stuff like that, which is, you would probably see it and say, I've seen this before. But the tip that got me excited was the 5th one in that list, which said, get yourself an alteration tailor. And I said, that seems interesting, unusual. And her point in this was that when you have an alteration tailor, what they will do is they'll tell you, sometimes the mistake we make is that our sleeve length is just a little too long. So what could have been a very smart jacket and suddenly becomes clumsy because your shirt's sleeve length is too long, or your trouser isn't falling as well as it should because it's probably half an inch longer than it should be. Forget all of that. Sometimes you have this a lovely shirt that you want to wear, and that button has gone missing on it, and you don't wear it, or the button on your cuff has gone missing, so you're constantly holding your sleeve because you can't wear it that you want to. So her point was, get yourself an alteration tailor because they'll be able to find these small things, and set them right for you. Now, the way it works for me is, of course, I said, yeah, makes sense. Good to have an alteration tailor. But then it got me thinking, maybe what we all need is not just an alteration tailor for our clothes, but an alteration tailor for our lives. Somebody who can look at us and tell us that one minor change that you need to make, that can make you more effective. That one change that you can make, it could be, are you losing your cool? So maybe, how to cool down a little bit. Are you tending to come across as arrogant? I know of a leader, Anurag, where when he talks, he does that. Okay, he wags his finger. Delightful man, very good at heart, loves his team loves him. But when he talks like that and doesn't realize it. Now, what he needs really is an alteration tailor who can probably tell him, what, do you even know that you do this? Chances are he doesn't. Tell him that, and maybe that finger will go down, right? And there are small things that we might be doing, which if we were to change, we can get better. And so my point is, I think in our lives, we all need an alteration tailor, someone who can point out those minor flaws and say, hey, maybe you should not do this, or maybe you should do this differently, and help us to make that change happen. And I'd go further. Sometimes what happens is that there is that shirt lying in your wardrobe which you don't wear because it's just that 1/2 inch too tight, and he'll tell you, don't worry, it's a great shirt, let's pull it out and I'll make that 1/2 inch all right for you, right? You can look better. And I think we all have skills, we all have strengths which we don't always use because we are not sure, because we don't think it'll fit. And I think an alteration tailor can help make that change for us. Yeah.
And that is, having no option is the best option. Again, I related to it. I was talking to someone and I was saying the same things, of course, in a different way. Everyone has a plan B and a plan C and a plan D. If you want to really succeed at it, you got to have, this has got to be your only plan. So I loved that chapter. But I want to ask you, we'll go on to other sections and the story. Yeah. Which one's your most favorite story in all the stories you've told in this book, and why?
I guess, it's always a tough one to say which of these is your favorite story. I have found, even from my earlier books, that what happens very often is somebody else I meet will come and tell me, what, I loved a particular story. And when they tell me which story they liked, I can tell you what's happening in their lives. Because very often what happens to us is when we say, I loved a particular story, what we are actually saying is it resonated with what I'm going through in my life.
You're possibly living that story.
You're possibly living that story. You're saying, wow, literally, how come no one told me that? And that's the one that you're clinging on to say, wow, this makes sense for me. So in many ways, I think that's what might happen. But I'll tell you a simple story, which I thought in many ways, and the reason I'm pointing it out also is that it happened really around the time the book was being written, which is, COVID had hit us. And this is therefore the early days, last April of 2020. A friend of ours was trying to collect some money to help these migrant laborers go back, to feed them. So there were lots of daily wage earners who didn't have food to eat. So this friend runs an NGO and was trying to collect money for them. And the wife was trying to help. So she was trying to help raise money for his NGO. And she was on the phone one morning, sitting on the dining table and calling everybody, calling friends and saying, what, this is what he's doing. This is why it's important. And, do give us, do contribute. And she must have made, 10, 15, 20 calls that morning. And I'm not sure how many of those friends, and I'm guessing, everybody did their own bit to help. So some of them might have, given her money to give to the NGO. Some of them might have done their own thing. That's not where the story goes. But what happened was that our maid, the maid who was living with us, she came up suddenly to my wife and she gave 100 rupees. And she said, Bhabhi, give this to that man so that, he can help other people. And to me, that was such a powerful moment because it brought home the message that, you know what, giving has nothing to do with how much you have. I think we must all learn to give. And giving doesn't come easy. And I think, you need to start early and you need to have a heart which says, let me give. And I think for her to give $100 was for me such a big moment. And many of us will say, when I become a millionaire, then I will give away 10%. Or when I become a billionaire, I'll give away 10%. And I'd like to say, don't do that. Start small. Because if today you can't give $1,000 away, you'll struggle to give away 1 million or 10 million, right? So maybe it's a good message for us to, and we tend to think that giving is connected with how much you have. And maybe that disconnect was something that hit me. And maybe a lesson I want to tell everybody who's listening to this now to say, you know what? Get into the habit of giving. You will discover joy. And I think there's a lot of joy in giving, which we don't give ourselves a chance to learn. So, beyond the point, having more is not going to be the secret to happiness in life. Learning to give might just be the difference.
Thank you, Prakash. And giving can be with your money, it can be with your time, it can be by being honest in your advice, it can be just listening, it can be in kind, in the sense you can donate some stuff which can be helpful to the other person. It can be even books, it can be a course, so it doesn't have to be just money, and any amount of money suggested that count. Now, let me ask you a question before I bring in Vasudha. Let me ask you, Prakash, how was the process of writing this book different than your first 3 books?
I think the first book is very different because in many ways, when you write that first book, you don't know if there will be a second book. So it's like saying that you kind of pick out whatever is that you want to say and you have a point of view. And at that time in my life, I was super excited to be able to share some of the stuff that I'd learned in my life and lessons from, and the whole idea of saying, what does it take for people to win? And I also had this big thing about what is it that is good for us? And I must tell you a little, sidelight, which is my first book, which eventually became The Habit of Winning, when I wrote it, was called The Salad Bar. And this was born out of something was very popular in those days, where you went to these fancy hotels and they would have a salad bar. Or even if you went to Nirula's in those days, you would have a salad bar where, it's like you get that plate and you can put whatever you want on the plate, or you can go back, get yourself unlimited helpings. It doesn't matter what you take in first, you can have it again. So my thought here was that, hey, this is a salad bar because everything here is good for you. It's healthy, it's good for you. And it's not as if you have to read the first chapter and then the second and the third. You can read the 20th chapter if it interests you and come back to the 15th. You'll still make sense out of it. Of course, my editors at Penguin were very nice to tell me that, yeah, you don't want this book to be lost in the cookery section of the bookstore, do you? And how people won't have the time to figure that the salad bar is really about other things in life and not about, is a metaphor. So I guess a lot of the first book was also born out of a blog that I used to write at that time. So the germ of the book, or the origins of that book, were out of a blog that I used to write at that time. What happened now with this book, I think, was that it was really an attempt to try and say, what are some of those lessons that I've learned, which I'm not sure everybody else has the privilege of learning early enough in their lives. And can I help share some of those lessons so that it can make a difference to other people's lives? And many of these would be things which sometimes we might say, I know this, or it makes sense. The problem is, while it's intuitive and while it makes sense, we don't always get it. And we make the mistake of doing perhaps the opposite. A lot of the lessons in this book are also around trying to say that it's not as if one way is the right way. And I'm actually telling people to think again, especially if I look at the debate happening in the country, the kind of dialogue that we have. I think people just have hardened views on I'm right, and nobody's listening to a possible other view, And I don't know who it was. Some wise man said that the real test of a first-rate intelligence is the ability to hold two opposing ideas at the same time and yet and yet function normally. And for me, that's a big thought. And therefore, a lot of the ideas are saying you might have thought, an example could be, we were always told, never judge a book by its cover. And I'm saying, you know what? That doesn't mean that create a shabby cover or a terrible cover and let it go. That's not a good idea. We were told that quality beats quantity. Who cares about quantity? Quality matters. And I'm saying, hang on, sometimes quantity can lead to quality. So maybe that's the kind of thinking that I've tried to pull together. So in terms of writing it out, I started thinking of those ideas and what it might be. And then, of course, got into the discipline of saying, let me sit down and write. And that's the other thing that I probably tell everybody, that if you want to write a book, the secret is to just sit and write. We all worry about 100 other things. Will the book get published? Will it do well? How will I market? What are royalties? Just forget all of that. If you want to write a book, write and make a discipline of writing. And if you can make that a habit, if you can make that a daily ritual for you, I think it can become very, very powerful. And that's probably true for anything you want to do. Don't make it a thing about saying that, aaj mood nahi hai, I will not write today. It's not about that. I think you need to just say, I need to write. Sit down, write, and I think it'll happen for you.
Okay, Prakash, at this point, I'd like to bring in my colleague, Vasudha Mukherjee, who's also read the book and is much younger. So you'll get a different perspective from her to ask you the next question and take the conversation forward. Vasudha, Mr. Prakash here and you.
Thank you, Dr. Batra, and welcome, Prakash. Welcome to our platform, and thank you for speaking with us today. And it's really nice that you mentioned that quote. I think it's by F. Scott Fitzgerald. He said that the test of a first-rate intelligence is ability to hold two opposing ideas while also retaining the ability to function, I think.
Yeah, exactly.
I think I got that correct. Right. No, it's a beautiful quote. Well said. I wanted to ask you, you just mentioned in passing that you wanted to share lessons that to people that you wish that you had learned at maybe a younger age or before. Does that mean that your target audience is maybe more towards the younger people, or is it still open to everyone? Or maybe your younger self, like who were you thinking about when you were writing this book?
So I do believe that I'd like to catch them young, because in that sense, it gives you a longer runway to ride on the benefit of the lessons that you've learned. I also think younger people are probably hungry for some of these lessons. And I think it can make a huge difference to your life if you can get these lessons early enough. As we grow older, I think we become resistant to change. We become resistant to new knowledge, to new information. And we start thinking that the way we've been doing things is the right way. And that can become a bit of a problem. So while it's, of course, you're never too old to learn, and it's not as if this will not work for an older person. I'm sure some of the older people might find that, yeah, I know a bit more of this, or I have learned this, and maybe there's less that they might find as saying it's brand new and I hadn't thought of it. But I do believe, and like I said earlier, one of the things that struck me, Vasudha, was when I went to work, I found several, and then as a leader of teams, I found lots of young people coming into work, and I was blown away by how smart they were. And I used to keep telling myself, I don't think I was as good as these young people are when I was their age. And then it would also happen that I don't think a lot of them would probably hit a roadblock or not go on to do as great a job or do justice to their talent as much as I might have thought they should. And what made the difference? And I think what made the difference was, while they may have been very smart, maybe there were some fundamental lessons that no one told them about. And those became speed breakers or roadblocks or impacted their growth and their progress. And therefore, this is really an attempt to try and get young people to learn some of those lessons that I might have learned as a young manager, as a kid, as someone growing up, as someone trying to take decisions. What have I learned? And I thought, hey, if I could share those lessons, maybe it'll help those young people. So yeah, to answer your question, I do think it's probably more directly aimed at the slightly younger, early stage in your career kind of people than someone who's already been there, done that, got it all right. So maybe I'll learn some lessons from them, which I can put in another book now.
Yeah. Are you ever surprised by how much people resonate with your lessons or connect to your stories? because sometimes it can feel like your stories are maybe personal to you, and it can be surprising when other people see themselves in it.
So in the early days, it used to both surprise me and delight me. And I still remember how many years ago I got an email from someone saying that, I have just read your book and I wanted to say thank you very much, because I'm sitting here in my engineering lab in my college, and I hated the place and I hated my parents for sending me here, but I've just read your book and I've now figured that, it's my life. I'm responsible. I need to take ownership. So stop blaming someone else. Stop blaming my parents. I'm going to take charge of my life and do something differently. And I just want to say thank you very much. And I thought to myself, wow, this is so cool, because, someone I don't know sitting in a place I might never go to has felt impacted or touched by something I've written. And hopefully it's made a difference to her life or to his life. And for me, I think, and I'll make a confession here, it's what gets me going, Vasudha. The high point of my life today is this ability, this minor thing that happens is to say, I might have made a small difference to one person. And if I have made that small difference to one person and help her or him become just a bit better or do justice to her talent, I feel, wow, job done, life well lived. Yeah. So to me, that gets me going. And therefore, when people come back and say that, either a story resonated or that it made a difference or that they gave it to their son or daughter to read because, maybe they'll benefit, I feel, wow, I do hope I can make a difference.
Well, that's wonderful to hear that that's what keeps you going. I would also like to ask, is that what got you started, or was there something else that got you started into this, motivational speaking, writing, self-help books?
Yeah, so I guess what got me started were maybe, I'd probably say three things happening over there. The first was, like I said, I'm a lucky guy. I think I was lucky. I got to work with some fabulous people. And I thought, hey, if I'm lucky and I've got those lessons, how about sharing them? And for me, that felt like a very nice way to, in some ways, give back, perhaps.
I don't think you realize that that's not a natural thought a lot of people have. It's very unique that you have that.
No, I don't think so. I think as I look around, and particularly when I look at young people like you, I think there are a lot. Your sense of society, I don't think I ever went to a beach. I stayed very close to Juhu Beach in Mumbai when I was growing up. I don't think I ever went to the beach to clean it up. And I know my kids would go to random beaches to say, let's clean up the place because, come on, we are harming the planet. I don't think this whole concern for things beyond me, myself, is something not there. But I let that pass for a minute, but I generally felt that, hey, here's a chance for me to share stuff. The second thing that happened, of course, was that I discovered the power of stories and storytelling pretty early in my life. And I figured that, so even as a young sales manager trying to get a bunch of 10 people to sell more soap in a corner of Karnataka, I found that I could tell them, what, we need to do this, or this is our target, we must do it. Come on, guys, let's do it. Nothing works. But you tell them a story, and the story suddenly seems to make a difference and get people excited, and they remember. And very often, a year later, when the job is done, they'll come back and talk about that story. So I discovered stories are powerful. So can I share what I've learned? Can I share them as stories? And maybe where it comes to the last part of it, I think, call it ikigai, call it what you will, but I personally feel, wow, I'm blessed. I think I figured the sweet spot of something that I think I can do reasonably well, and maybe slightly, let's say there was a unique strength. I'd like to say I've kind of figured what that might be. I love it. I just enjoy writing. I enjoy speaking. I enjoy what I do. And maybe that's the second bit. The third one was to say, make a difference to the world. And I do feel that I get my high, like I said, out of make a small difference in other people's lives. And, having found it, that's really where my sweet spot is. And I say, hey, this is a happy life here.
Yeah, absolutely. And it's interesting that you talk about storytelling so much, because storytelling is a very powerful tool. I mean, even in education, we hear about it all the time, how it's one of the most effective tools in even teaching. So was this something that, did you use storytelling because it resonated with you, or did you also sort of know that this would be the best way to get your message across?
So like I said, I learned pretty early in my life. I still remember as a young schoolboy debater, I learned that if you had to get your point across, you could use a lot of logic, and a lot of the logic can be countered quite easily. And then it becomes your logic versus my logic. But if you tell people a story, the message sticks.
Yeah.
And it becomes a far more powerful representation of your point of view and what you want to say. And like I said, that stayed with me through my working life, where I found that stories were powerful. It was also on a personal level where I figured that I'd read this book, 356 pages. And when I put the book down, what I remembered was this one paragraph which had a lovely story. And I said, wow, that's a story I'd want to share with the whole world. So I realized that stories are powerful, and it's a great way to get your message across. So today when I speak or when I write, I could be telling everybody that this is the right thing to do, or here are the 5 principles, or here are the 10 ways to do it. I don't think that works as effectively as telling them a story and then letting that story drive the message that I want to convey. So that's really how it happened.
All right. So I want to ask you then what is some of your favorite stories that you read or saw growing up that resonated with you?
I guess it's interesting. So stories work at different levels for all of us. And, it's interesting to say, what is a story and how does it work? So you could start with all the little fables you might have read as a little kid and those messages that might have stuck with you to say, look, I learned something from there. Some of the stories could be stuff that happened to you. And you might say, look, I learned something from there. And there are some stories over here, of what I learned from a boss sitting in a restaurant in Salem one cold night after a dinner, and he did something and it taught me a lesson, or a lesson I learned when I was trying to be this, young brand manager, trying to say I know it all and getting the agency to do what I want them to do and thinking I'll create some great advertising. And I learned a lesson over what might happen. But let me try and touch upon a couple of other things, and I'll try and, something that has driven me as a story from many, many years ago is something that I read. I think there's a guy called John Bogle, who is this, hedge fund manager, legendary investor. And John Bogle wrote a book in which he tells a story of, of going out for a meal. There's a friend who goes out, who takes author Joseph Heller, who wrote Catch 22. So Joseph Heller and his friend have gone to an investment banker's house for an evening. It's a cocktail and dinner, and Joseph Heller's, kind of tagging along with the friend because it's, he says, come along. They go there, he's having some wine, and the friend looks at Joseph Heller suddenly and says, do you realize that, this man, our host, the investment banker, probably makes more money in a day than you've made in a lifetime? And Joseph Heller says, yeah, maybe, takes another sip of the wine, and he says, but you know what? I figured that I have something that guy will never have. And the friend says, what? And Joseph Heller says, enough. I have enough. And I read this many, many years ago. And I must confess, in many ways, that kind of impacted me to say, it's important for all of us to have an enough in our lives, or else we can be in search of more for all our lives and live an entire life looking for more and feeling, gosh, if only I had more time, I could have done more or got more, versus being able to live a life where you say, you know what, I figured I've got enough. Let me do what I want to do now. And maybe that made, in many ways, impacted some of my career decisions, impacted what I did with my life. And I'm so grateful that I read that story, because enough is a word that kind of stayed with me.
Thank you for sharing that anecdote. I think it's very telling. It is a good story. And it's also interesting, the kind of stories that do resonate with us, because we can be told the same lessons over and over again, in moral sciences or teachings in schools by our parents. But we never know what story is just going to stick with a person, right? Like in your case, it was this particular one. So do you ever find it difficult to maybe, are you, I mean, this is just assuming that you're thinking about the reader. Do you ever find it like, wondering like, oh, is the story going to resonate with them? Is this not going to resonate? Is this too much? Is this too of an exclusive of an experience for them to understand? Is that something that you worry about sometimes? Or are you just like, no, I'm putting out my lessons, let it be?
No, I do worry about it. And I think it's pointless, because it's not an exercise for me to say, here's a great story that I've heard and I find it fabulous, so you must hear it. I don't think that's the way I look at it. For me, the story works if it works for my reader or for my listener. And like I said earlier, Vasudha, one of the things that I've learned to do is to just share what I've learned. And I might do that in a small post I might put out somewhere. I might do that in a column that I might write for Business World, or I might do it in a conversation that I might have. I might do it in a talk that I'm delivering somewhere. What I do is to try and understand, how does this go? Does it make sense? Or do people come back and say, hang on, I didn't know what you're talking about. That didn't make sense to me. My wife is a fabulous resident critic for this. So there are times when I tell her, this is such a powerful idea. And she says, sorry, I didn't get it. Say it again. What was that? And what that tells me is that I might still think, wow, it's a great idea, but I haven't been able to make it simple enough. And for me, I think making it simple is key. I don't want my reader to have to tax her or his brain to figure out what was that again, say it, let me understand, or that it sounds right. I saw some big words there and there's a reference to something big, but I didn't understand it. To me, that's a fail. I would want to make sure that what I'm saying is simple, it's relatable. And I think to me, that was the other part. So what happens very often for me is I might think, and to be honest, it is not as if a lot of this is rocket science and, for the first time in the world, there's this knowledge coming out. It's not. Like you said, maybe it's stuff that you learned in moral science class in school. Maybe it's stuff that, parents told us. Maybe it's stuff that in some situation in our life we figured. But for me, what makes it interesting is to say, wow, here's a lovely lesson. And here's how it played out for me. Let me relate it to something that happened in my life or something that's happening in the world around us. So it doesn't look like, oh, that, it's something that happened to somebody else in another part of the world. I think for all of us, our ability to externalize lessons, tell somebody that's how you're, no, that doesn't work for me. Or, you don't understand my business or you don't understand my situation. So there's an attempt to say that all those lessons are good for somebody else. It doesn't work for me. And my job, I think, is to try and say, here's how it might work for you. And how can I put it across to you in a manner by which you say, I may not have meant it for you, but you're now reading it and saying, you know what? I think this might work for me. And I want people to respond with, I think I'm going to give this a try. I think I'm going to make that small change in my life, which hopefully will make a big difference later on.
Yeah, I think this is perfect. Makes sense why you would write a self-help book or motivation book or lessons book for younger audiences, because if you were to turn around and give this to someone older, they'd probably be like, I already know that. This is like the same lesson in another language, or maybe that story might not resonate with them too much. The lessons kind of trickle down among generations, right? But it's also please.
Yeah, but I just want to also make the point that I think sometimes what happens to us is that, very often you go to have a meal at a restaurant and you come out and say, I thought and then you take your favorite dish, or you say, I thought that was so well done. I loved it, right? That's what you come back. And then when someone asks you, how do you like the restaurant? You say, oh, it's a terrific place. You must try there, and, pick your favorite dish and say, you must try their biryani, or you must try they do amazing thin crust pizzas. So you just need that one dish in a restaurant, which you really love, for you to say, wow, I love this place. When somebody asks you, how's the restaurant? You don't say, okay, let me tell you, I think if you look at the entrance to the place, I think it's a 4 out of 5. In terms of quality of service, I think it's 3.5. In terms of the food cost, that's not how you look at places. If you find one thing that you like about it, it can make a difference for the way you might look at it. And I personally feel that even if someone's been there and done that, there might be this one little lesson here, which you haven't thought about, which is something that you don't get right. And sometimes just changing that can make a huge difference to your relationships, to the way you might work, to the way you might look at the world, to the decisions you make in your life, to the choices you make in your life. And that one thing then becomes priceless. And it's no longer about saying, this book costs 299 rupees and, I must get 299 rupees worth. I mean, like somebody said, if you read a book about how to have a healthy heart, right, and it costs $200. But if that helps you to avoid a heart attack, how much is that book worth? It's not $200, right? And I think for me, that's the way I'd like to look at it, to say maybe there's a lesson here which can make a difference to other people's lives, no matter where they are, no matter what stage of their life they're in.
Also, I find it very interesting on like how observant you are to your surroundings, to everything that's happening to you, finding lessons in this very simple acts that are going on around you. So, you know, you find these lessons in these acts too. But while writing the book, did you also learn a lesson?
I'm
Many
sure
lessons?
I did. I'm sure yeah. So I'm a sucker for this kind of stuff where I just feel there's actually so much happening around us. There's so much that we can learn. And maybe that's the other bit, which is to have a mindset. And I'm using a bad word. It's not, this is not to make it sound very psychology heavy with mindset and all that. I think it's just to say, keep your mind open to the idea that you don't know it all and that you're constantly learning, and that maybe what you thought is true, maybe what you thought was the right way to do it is not the best way to do it. Just keep yourself open to it. And you'll suddenly discover that, there is advice coming at you. There are lessons flying at you. There are people out there waiting to give you advice. And, I say this, it's not as if advice will come to us from those people who are learned, who've got PhDs and who have, kind of done all the research to get it there. I don't think that's the case. Like I said, my maid at home, delightful woman, she taught me a lesson, right? And I think you just need to be open to the fact that you can learn lessons all around it from people around us.
Right, absolutely. I read from a comment saying, simplicity is surely the most effective way to connect. And I think that is actually the lesson we also are getting out of this. But you make an interesting point about being open to lessons. And that's why maybe it's more about the impact of a lesson than the lesson itself, right? And the story and the memory and the impact that memory and the lesson has on you than the actual lesson. So really, when people just tell you advice, it's never going to resonate the way going through the experience of listening to a story will. That's just my comment. That's not really a question.
Yeah. Agree with you.
All right. So I also want to ask you one more thing. It's what do you have on your bucket list?
What do I have on my bucket list? A lot of excitement.
Yes.
I'm super. I keep saying this. I'm super excited about the next 60 years of my life. Lots to do. Lots more books to write. Lots more people to hopefully learn from and help. I'm super excited also to spend time with the family. I'm hoping that I can. My wife complains sometimes that when the kids were growing up, she isn't entirely sure I was there for them as much as she might have liked. I disagree, because I do think I was there. But having said that, I just want to kind of make sure that I'm there for other people. Could be friends, could be family, could be for the rest of the world. That's really what's there. And of course, the bucket list would include stuff like saying, travel a lot more, enjoy the golf that I play, and I hope I can play a lot more of it. And I certainly want to write a lot more. That's certainly very high on my list of what I'd like to do.
Do you still want to stick with the same genre, or do you plan on ever expanding out of it, trying something else?
Yeah, so I'm super excited about writing a banking thriller, which has got a murder and mystery and no, I'm just kidding. I can't do it.
No, I can't.
I can't do it.
I was trying to see how far you would go.
And you could see I can't go too far, even when I'm imagining it.
Yeah, the banking thriller is not a thing.
I'll leave that for my friend. Yeah, but I probably want to stay with this whole idea of saying, how can I help other people become as good as they were meant to be? How can I share lessons that can help them get there? And that could be in different parts of, it could be, you could cut it, slice it in different ways. But fundamentally, I think I'd be there telling stories. I see myself as a storyteller out there to try and tell you the story that I think can make a difference to your life. Maybe that's what I'll do.
Yeah, not a story on banks and thrillers. But do you ever see yourself maybe using any other kind of mediums, like, for example, YouTube or podcast to share your stories, or are you happy with writing?
Good point. So I'm certainly I'm happy writing, but I do want to discover the other mediums that you talked about. So I have a little channel that I've got started on YouTube. It's called Chai with Pi. Pi being the way I was called as a little kid. Prakash Iyer became Pi in college. So Chai with Pi is a set of videos that I do every week, and it's early days yet. But I'm hoping that it'll get a life of its own and will give me a chance to reach out to people who may not be reading as much. There is a podcast in the works, and hopefully next week it should be out, which is really something I've been working on. I'm quite passionate about, where I talk to people who've kind of got it right, or who've been, in some senses, successful at what they set out to do. And I'm trying to say, can I learn lessons from them? Can I pull out stories from their lives, which we can share with other people? It's called Heads and Tails. So yeah, hopefully there'll be some tails from heads, which people can benefit from.
That makes sense, because you're you're a very passionate speaker, and I think people would love listening to you. I prefer podcasts over YouTube, so that's why I was asking for my own benefit. So yep, I think we have reached basically the end of this interaction. So just to wrap up, final thoughts, predictions for the future. What can we expect from you other than your podcast and many more books? What are your predictions for the future?
I think what the last 2 years have taught us is, try and stay focused on the present. Yeah. Don't worry too much about the future. The future might be very, very different from what you had imagined. And I'm not here to suggest, therefore, that a podcast or a YouTube video is really going to be the future of the way we do it. Maybe there'll be newer mediums, maybe there'll be newer platforms. And I'm hoping that I will still be in a position where I kind of say, wow, here's a tide coming, and here's a wave coming. Let me ride it. Let me try and say, what do I make the most of it? Rather than worry about saying, oh my goodness, look at what's coming ahead of me. I hope I can turn and say, wow, look what's coming. That's the way I'd like to look at the future. So, enjoy every moment.
What about book tours or moving around? Nothing like that.
Unfortunately, I guess, given what's been happening in the country and all those rules, I haven't been able to do even a physical book launch. Haven't been in a bookstore, physical bookstore. But yeah, I'm hoping that as things open up, I'd love to be out there. And like I said, right at the beginning, when Anurag asked me this question, I think, we did a book launch a couple of weeks back online, and we had lots of people. But it's not quite the same as being in a bookstore and seeing friends from that city out there. And really the joy that an author has in just signing a book and putting down a name on it is, I think if you're a reader or a buyer out there listening in, I want to say this: you have no idea how much an author depends on readers for that feeling of saying, wow, maybe this has been worth it. So I've certainly missed that, Vasudha, and I'm hoping that as things get better, I can travel around the country and be in cities across India, signing books, reading out, talking about the book, and hopefully making a small difference to other people's lives too in the process.
All right. Thank you so much for coming here today. Where can we find your book?
I'd like to say wherever you like to go looking for a book, but yeah, the most usual suspects. Amazon has it, Crossword has it, so your neighborhood bookstore will have it. But it's also available on Amazon, and and there are people. You might, if you go to my LinkedIn, you might find someone. There are people who actually said, "Can you sign?" Given that there are no bookstores, there are people who got me to sign books. And there's a guy who runs a business called Rohit. Rohit Enterprises, it's called here, and he's got me to sign books that he can then ship to anybody in the country. To say that, look, if you're looking for a signed book, I will give it to you. That's a nice thing to do. And like I said, sometimes as authors, as people who might do things, we don't realize there are other people out there who do things in their own way to make a difference to what you might be doing. Now, to have a bookseller who takes the initiative to come get me to sign books and say, I will ship it to anybody in the country. Hey, grateful to him for what he does for me.
Oh, thank you for announcing that. And I'm sure our audience is going to really appreciate that. They're probably already looking this bookseller up online to find him. But thank you so much for coming here, Prakash, and sharing your book with us and talking about it with us and being so open about lessons that you've learned and sharing some of your stories too. It's such a pleasure having someone who is just a natural motivational speaker and just brings in so much energy on our platform. And it's just really inspiring to see and to hear. All right.
Thank you so much. Thank you so much for having me here. It's been such a pleasure talking to
and
you,
audience,
and to Anurag. And to the audience, thank you so much for taking the time to be here. Appreciate that.
And for commenting and participating, thank you so much. And if you want to watch this thing, this entire video, it's on YouTube, LinkedIn, all the usual suspects. We have it on Facebook, and of course, VW Business World and VW Disrupt is where you can find us. And thank you so much for being here. We'll do this again sometime.
Look forward to it. Stay safe, everybody.